So we get tons of questions asking about speaker upgrades and the kind of things you need to think about when you're swapping a speaker. So I gave our man in Austin, Texas, Rick Skillman, a call. Rick's a semi-professional musician. He gigs 2 or 3 times a week out there in Texas. So he's pretty clued up on the kind of gear that you need to use and how to swap a speaker. What are the things you need to think about when you're doing that. So we had a little chat about that. Covered a few of the more interesting aspects of speaker upgrades. So if there's anything in there that is interesting to you, leave us a comment. Let us know whether you found it useful. If not, no big deal. If you did, maybe we can talk some more, give you some more details. The quality drops out a couple of times. The video's not the best, but hey, he's 6,000 miles away. What are you going to do? So enjoy the video. If you like what you see, check out more videos on Celestion UK. Here's the video.
Maybe like if you were to say, what are the top 3 or 4 or 5 things that you would want our customers to know when reloading a cabinet, like aligning expectations, and then my response would be that, yeah, power doesn't always equate to headroom. Instead, you want your power to make sure that it's adequate for your amplifier. Or if you're loading 2 speakers in a 212, you need to double the power of the lowest speaker. And these are things you answer as the doctor all the time.
Absolutely, they are. Yeah. Those are the kind of the frequently asked questions that we get. I mean, there's a good point right away. I mean, people often talk about headroom, but it means different things to different people. I mean, what would you define headroom as particularly?
Well, letting some people would say, before the speaker breaks up. So letting the personality of the speaker, or the amplifier shine through before the speaker starts to color the sound too much. Yeah. Quite often that's a bit of a misnomer, because one, you have to define what headroom means. Secondly, how are they trying to get there? What's the rest of their circuit involved? But it's difficult to talk to every individual purchasing a speaker at a time. But if you can give them some common knowledge, it was, it's all part of a signal chain. But headroom is just that. It's how clean does it stay before it breaks up? And we can make a 2-watt speaker stay clean until it implodes on itself. And we can make a 100-watt speaker, or like the Alnico Cream, that's 90 watts, but it sounds amazing with the, 5-watt, triode amp or whatever they call it, single-ended amp. Triode's the wrong term, but single-ended type Class A circuit. It could still make the speaker dance with that minimal amount of power versus, it doesn't need to see a 90-watt amp to make it go. That's my point. So there's 2 examples of what you could expect from speakers when addressing how to line it up with the amplifier you're using.
It's more about the materials you use to make the speaker than it is what you rate it at, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say
those things go hand in hand. But...
Well, the thickness of the cone, doesn't that often
sure.
harmonic content more than the size of the magnet or the voice coil, or it's all part of the sum, it all sums up to do it. But I'm saying that there are many things that contribute to headroom. So, and then advising people on power. That's like I said, that's the other thing, is a lot of people say, well, I have a 212 or a 412. I get that a lot. And I want to load it with 2 standard, 25-watt greenbacks and 2, just be ridiculous, say K100s, So now, do I have a 250-watt cabinet? No, you have a 50-watt cabinet. It's the sum of the lowest power speakers.
That's right. Yeah, because the power gets shared equally, so the weakest link in the chain becomes the lowest powered speaker.
There's been debate from some end users or customers, OEMs, that about if you wire it series parallel versus or versus in series, whatever, all the terms. To me, it's like, well, if that makes you feel better, okay. But the reality is the power is the power, and that's the power handling. If you put the highest powered one first, it doesn't mean it's going to save the life of the one down the line, So it might have a 10% factor,
Yeah.
but somebody's going to come back screaming when they've just launched their new speaker because they thought that was okay. So we make enough speakers in our range to address power requirements from any stage application you would think of. So, I always tell guys, if you love the sound of a greenback, but you're using it in a 112 combo that's 40 watts, get the Greenback M. It's just going to do the job for you. It's going to give you the very greenback-ish tone because it's fundamentally the same ingredients with a bit more power handling put to it. So that's when it can go. That's when things can go wrong, I think.
Yeah. So headroom.
You get that a lot?
A little bit. People just assume that. Because it's a higher rated speaker, that they can't use it at a low level. Somebody will ask me if I've got a 40 watt amp, what speaker shall I use? So I'll say something like using a Greenback amp would be great, 65 watts. But then they'll come back to me and say, "Oh, but what if I only play it with the volume set on 1? Is that going to give me the full tone of the speaker?" To which the answer is, yeah, of course it is.
It's gonna give you the full tone. It may not, if you're playing at home on 1, you may not hear the speaker at its limits, but which introduces occasionally a bit of a different tone, which some people think is great, but usually those are rock stars with disposable budgets. You probably don't want to blow up your speaker. So yeah, at 1, you're going to get most of the personality that you're going to hear. It's like people talk about breaking in speakers too. I still get that a lot.
Yeah.
We've had videos and we've put stuff up. Speakers are, I tell people, I know we have our official stance. I just tell, I still gig when we're not in quarantine, 6 to 10 nights a month here around Texas. And, I tell people, I said, a speaker is going to have an initial shift depending on the volume, depending on how you're playing through. Breaking in speakers is like breaking in your shoes or your slippers. It's like, it's going to go different for everybody a little bit. And how the speaker lives the rest of its life is going to depend on those, those introductory moments too, to me, I have found. And so, yeah, if you're going to hear a speaker shift in the first, within the first hour, let's say, playing at a nice round volume, you might hear a 10% shift. You just kind of, it won't be an audible click. It'll be like, you'll just suddenly go, oh, you know what?
Relaxation.
Yeah, I can tell it just chilled out a bit, in the last few minutes of strumming. And then maybe another 40 hours, 30 hours of kind of decent volume playing, you wouldn't notice another shift. And then for the next 50 years, it slowly just kind of breaks into whatever it's going to be until it's not any longer. And
by that time, then it's ready.
Yeah. And then, and it depends on, do you live in a humid environment or a dry environment? Your own rig will never sound the same on a hot, dry day in Arizona as it does on a muggy day in Florida, or pick your corner of the universe. It's going to sound different. That's why your rig sounds different outdoors as it does indoors. So it's a rabbit hole you can go down, but you tell people that in your most common, in the place you're going to use it most, that's where you should probably evaluate the tone, because that's going to keep you happy 80% of the time.
Whatever it is,
when I evaluate our new models, I'll listen to it here in my home office, and then I'll take it on gigs, and then I'll listen to it just on stage as you would playing at a pub or a bar or whatever. And then I'll listen to it through the PA system, and I'll listen to it through my in-ear monitors, which I don't really wear as much these days. When I was playing out west and the venues were a bit bigger, we were on ears, but it really does give you a true sense of what the microphone's getting. And all those things make a difference. The voltage in your wall, it's a rabbit hole, but you can give people the fundamentals, like, hey, power handling, what's your final goal, what's your signal chain. You can narrow it down, and I would say if people need advice, which we're trying to do here is give them a few shortcuts to that advice. We could get it right for you probably 90% of the time.
So thinking about kind of the different speakers with all the different kind of characteristics and tones, what would you say to somebody who I mean, do some speakers suit certain amps better than others? Or is it just a case of picking the speaker that you like the sound of best? And just
good question. Yeah, I don't think there's the way I view it personally, and I think it's scalable to other players out there, is I can't say one speaker is my favorite speaker. I could say one of our speakers would be my favorite in a certain type of amp. I love, I've been a big fan of the Alnico Cream, which has done very well for us. It sounds amazing in most applications, but if I was playing more, with most amps, I should say, but there are certain amps where I like a Creamback H or even an Alnico Gold better. So it's hard. You can't just say, can't say one thing's your favorite. That's right.
No, you can't. You got an opinion too, man? So what is it about the Cream particularly, and what amps wouldn't you put it in?
So I'm not a big fan of Alnicos in high-powered American amps, like 6L6 high-powered. I'll just say it, like, I had a Fender Twin, which I love Fender Twins, and I thought, and this actually goes back to the Gold, to be fair, but I had a Fender Twin. I thought, I was playing a lot of country at the time, and I thought, well, I'm gonna put these two Golds in here. It's gonna be amazing. But then it turns out that really high powered with the Alnico left a bit of a hi-fi taste,
Interesting.
So yeah. But then I found out, well, several of the Nashville cats, that have been on thousands of albums, they were all reloading their higher powered American voiced or Fender voice, Fender amps in this case, with vintage 30s. Especially because they have an inherent mid scoop, the way Fenders were designed, where even though the Twin is the one that has a mid-range knob, but that something about the mid-range of a vintage 30 really made it special. And I found the same thing. What was that?
Just kind of fills in the gap.
It does. And then I found out a vintage 30 and a deluxe reverb is phenomenal. I mean, or a Gold in a even better, like the Gold that didn't work for the Twin was amazing in a deluxe reverb. So you just find these things out. I guess, people, we have the Ruby, which is super cool, but it's a much warmer, rounder sounding Alnico. It's darker, if you will, there's only so many terms, and terms mean something different to everybody. Yeah. But if we could agree, it's not as bright or present.
Darker is right.
Yeah, but that sounds amazing. And like, if you have an amp that's a bit ratty on the edges, like an old Tweed Deluxe or an AC-15, and you want to knock down some of those really like the crazy frequencies. You know, anything that's a bit ugly on a microphone or live is, you know, gets real muddy and you want it controlled. That's great. If you don't, you know, if the Alnico Ruby is if it's a budgetary consideration, the A type does this a very similar thing.
Yeah, yeah.
It's more flatter response. It's great at taming an amp, where something like an H30 or one of our, you know, greenbacks or any of our signature, you know, iconic speakers, they have that British chime clang thing, and it's going to send some of those frequencies flying. So, so there's ways you can, I mean, to put it simply is, let's talk cars, you know, or I'm a motorcycle guy. So, you can take a basic car and put a really nice exhaust on it and improve its performance by threefold.
Mm-hmm.
You can also take a really high-end exotic race car and put a crap exhaust on it and choke it down where it's not going to run very well. And I say that because you can really get a ton of mileage out of changing a speaker on your amp. And I guess, you know, and especially right now when people are kind of like on their computers a lot and doing research or purchasing gear, hopefully, and supporting their favorite brands, that that's one thing to consider. If you have a cabinet around, you know, reloading it and tailoring the sound of that cabinet to your amplifier is a big deal, and it's something that can be done with a little bit of thought, and hopefully we can supply you with some of that knowledge. But mine's just an opinion. We have, yeah.
In the end, all we can do is offer an opinion, can't we? Because, you know, people are going to listen and make their own minds up.
Well, some of the most iconic recordings were done by mistake, or they didn't know what they were doing at the time.
Sure.
You know, did Slash have a rented amp that he didn't know about, and it turned into this, you know, like the epitome of cool modern Marshall tone, you know, which was, we know it was a Marshall. It was great. Most of them are great, you know. So, you know, or Hendrix, you know, let me use this guitar upside down through this, you know, probably cheap coily cable into this fuzz face type thing. And it was a very fundamental setup, and it turned out to set the bar for generations of players.
So what are the best upgrades that you've done? You know, when you've swapped a speaker out and thought, yeah, that's the one. That's some real magic.
From my personal arsenal, well, first I need to confess that I've counted them. It's sad. I should have spent more time playing and practicing, but I've owned 97 guitar amps. But I only own like 5 at a time. Like if I'm not using them in gigs, I'm not a collector. I'm a less is more kind of guy usually. I consider it job research, career research, is to own all these amps. That's what I told my wife. But for me, I guess I'd probably say I have a cabinet that I reloaded with a Creamback H and an Alnico Cream just a few years ago, obviously. And I use that cabinet with a lot of amps, and it's just always really good. I use it on a lot of gigs. And it's a big 212. The Creamback H is probably my go-to speaker because power-wise, I'm not going to lose gear at a show because I blew my speaker, so it handles it. It takes pedals really well, or if you're playing just a channel switching or a single channel ad, it just kind of gives you what you put into it. That's been my most popular upgrade. I have probably not my first, but an early oh wow moment was with I have a 65, it's called 65 Royal Albert, so 65 amps. They've been around for quite a while, and you saw them on every stage on television for a good while. I'm trying not to be a commercial for one brand or another. It's just amps I happen to own out of the 97 amps, right? So, but one I still gig with a lot, which is head is back there on top of that 412. That's what's called a Royal Albert. It's a very straight ahead. It's almost like a blonde basement circuit. It's like 50 watts. It's got 4 tubes total. It's like real fundamental. But that I have a 112 cabinet that matches that I use on most shows. If I'm not using my Vibra King, and that was when I put a gold in it, and that was 2000. That's a prototype gold. That was probably 2006 because we launched in 2007, and that was a oh wow, it doesn't get much better than this moment. And that 112 cabinet has probably seen 40 speakers because it's a 112. It's if I'm testing a new speaker for Celestion or for myself to take on a gig, that's the cabinet that usually gets the fresh speaker.
Yeah.
And so I know what that cabinet sounds like, I guess is what I'm saying. Yeah, it's been, that gold was, it still, for that setup, is the bee's knees, as you would say. It is amazing because whether I'm on an outdoor show and I can turn the amp up and really get it breaking up because it's a loud, brutal. It's the same amp that Chris Robinson used with the Black Crows, like on the whole Shake Your Money Maker and Hard to Handle, and that era. He used that in a Harry Joy's. He had a few amps, but also Keith Urban from the American, country music guitar hero. He used the same amp. Vince Gill borrowed this amp for the Tonight Show once. They put it in the standard colors from the factory were black and tan, and this was my own custom little request, but they fit it because he used 2 at a time, so they fit it into a 2 of them to match, but it was that head. And yeah, the gold in that was amazing. What else?
Tell us about the Vibra King.
The Vibra King was I bought it at a vintage shop called Austin Vintage, actually, which is a really cool shop here we have in Texas. And it was a stock early 90s Vibra King, which is a 310 combo, which is really an odd duck in its own. 310 doesn't sound, yeah. So, and on the advice of my friend and old co-guitar player out in California, Arnie Newman, so I picked that amp up because I had a store credit. I had purchased something. It's a used shop, or they sell some new gear, but it's a vintage shop. So, it's not a big box store where they just hand you, your $1,500 back and say, thanks for trying. It's kind of like you get a store credit, you're going to spend it here. And so I saw the Vibra King and I was like, I really wanted a combo amp because Texas has in Central Texas, we have 300 venues, but they're not coliseums. Most of them are smaller places. And I wasn't going to roll in there with my wet, dry, wet stereo crazy, whatever rig, just playing, Texas country music. It's like, I need a pedal board and a cool combo amp, and that's perfect. And excuse me. And so I found this thing, and I had always heard how cool they were, and I just took a chance on it, and it turned out to be amazing. Now mine, there was a blue frame speaker, I'll say, not from Celestion. They came standard in those back in the early 90s. And they were supposed to be cool, but mine didn't have those. It had some, well, we respect them as a company, but Jensen, like P10 something, speakers in it, which were cool, obviously, classic Fender thing. But Arnie had always said, to make that amp really a gig horse and something that's going to take your overdrive pedals really well, and when you want it to sound like a British stack, it will, and when you want it to sound like a classic Fender, it will, was the RG10 Vintage.
Okay, interesting.
And they're amazing in that amp, just like a Vintage 30 or a few of our other models will offer that mid-range enhancement on American voiced amp. This does the similar job. Because people said, it's kind of our 10-inch vintage 30-ish type speaker. I don't know if that's our official statement. You would know, but it's kind of, it does a bit of it.
Yeah.
More, if we don't think it does, it does a bit. At least we should concede, because it kind of has that classic Celestion presence to it versus something darker like a greenback. Now I gigged with it like that for 3 years probably, and 3 years at a couple nights per week at 4 sets per night. I break my speakers in pretty quick. Like the first night, they see a lot of their initial abuse, and then they keep going. I've recently put in 10-inch creambacks. I just switched those in, and they're phenomenal too. Now they do have they have less what I call headroom as the G10 Vintage. G10 Vintage seems to be more. So there's perfect opportunity to have that discussion that we touched on earlier. The G10 Vintage has this almost like a creamback H, kind of like this. It lets the amp do its thing, and then it colors the edges with that Celestion-esque, sound. Where the creamback is, it has a signature sound to it based on the lower powered models, but in a 10-inch it's kind of fair game because we didn't really have it wasn't an evolution of sorts. It was a addition to the family of our 12-inch product, and it just does a thing that it's not as dark as a 10-inch greenback, because some people would say that's a darker speaker, and I think it's great for taming some 110 combos that could be a bit ratty and nipping at your ankles a lot, and it really kind of focuses the frequencies a little more into guitar centric sounds that you want. But the 10-inch creamback is it's not bright, but it's got plenty of treble. It's got a nice mid-range presence without being right between the eyes mid-range. It doesn't have as much low end, because I don't always use the term bass because I don't think that's right, but it doesn't have as quite the low end authority as a G10 Vintage, but it's got plenty of low end, if that makes sense, to create a balanced finished product. Really good. So I don't know, what I might do is I like mixing speakers too, just because I can, I guess. But not only does it deliver something to you immediately if you're playing at your house or in a small pub, but if you're miking the amp, you can mic one of each speaker and give that same experience to the front of house. And that's why I do it. So yeah, they're really good. It's I guess I need another Vibra King, and I could have one with G10 Vintages and one with 10-inch greenbacks, and I'd have the perfect but I need a hernia operation, because that amp, one of those amps weighs a ton. Yeah. My internet go funky?
Yeah, it keeps coming in and out, so you're a little bit time lapse. So here's one last question to finish on then. 3 speakers in a cabinet. That's going to be funky with the impedance, isn't it?
Purposefully, in the case of the Vibra King.
So what happens there? Do you have 2 8s and a 16, or how does that work?
I think they're 8 ohm, and I want to say I'd have to look at the wiring diaphragm. I can wire a cabinet in any direction you want to, but 3, they're trying to I think I got to measure the total impedance. I want to say it comes out to like 5 something, or
if it was 3 8s, I think it's 5.3 or something stupid.
Yeah, it was weird. It was like it's like purposefully, but I think they use an 8 ohm transformer, so you're dragging the transformer in a I want to say it was done in a purposeful manner, and somebody that was designed by Bruce Zinke, and Fender. Yeah, I'd have to ask somebody, to be honest with you. It's a purposeful, like, you just can't take that chassis out and put it in a 212 cabinet or 210 or a 412 and get the same exact sound. It'll still sound cool, but it'll sound much more like a Bassman or a Bandmaster or whatever. Yeah.
Crazy impedance that's part of the signature tone of the amp itself.
However, it's messing with the impedance. Whatever drag it's creating is part of the magic that it creates. I mean, it's I think it was 3/8 ohm, and yeah, I think, yeah, gosh, I gotta look. I think you wired two of them. Were going up to 16, and then the third one was pulling it back down. And I don't know if the total impedance, yeah, it's on the internet. I guarantee it, folks. You can look at a Vibra King schematic. Yeah, sure. But what it does is, yeah, but you don't want to do that. But we don't want to recommend you try to drag your amp around through the mud on impedance on your standard models, right?
Leave that to the professionals.
So I tell people all the time, it's because some people, well, leave it to the professionals. But simple advice is, you really don't want to. You want to match your impedance, but you really don't want to use a 4 ohm cabinet when the lowest impedance on your amp is 8 ohm. Yeah. You know, the tolerance is much less friendly going that direction. I mean, if you had to use an 8 ohm head into a 16 ohm cabinet, and actually some classic tones were created that way, but I wouldn't recommend it for your average guy. Thinking Celestion gave you bad advice. But yeah, you know what I mean. I don't want it to be my fault, but yeah, you definitely want to. It depends on manufacturers. That's what, defer to your manufacturer, because people say, well, don't you think 16 ohm cabinets sound better? Well, yeah, if I'm always using a British, like a Marshall, that inherently want to see 16 ohm loads, or certain Vox amps. But if you're using a Fender or a matchless, which, funny enough, matchless, a lot of them were done based on an early Vox. Quite often they run a 4 ohm load. So you just gotta know what you're starting with, and different amps have a different preference, where they sound best. Many amps have a 4, 8, 16 taps, but they'll do all three, but really we're optimized under one. And you just speak to the manufacturer. What your manufacturer put in there, if it's a combo amp or extension cabinet, is probably what they found to work best, but it doesn't mean sonically. So I'd keep the impedance to what they recommended, but sonically you may choose to, run with the H magnets instead of M magnets, or Alnico versus ferrite, or Neo versus the other two. So,
etc.
Yeah, etc. Yeah, it's a rabbit hole. It's a, but I guess more than, with no disrespect to your oxygen-free cables or your true bypass pedal or your whatever vintage NOS tube you choose, or valve. Yeah, speakers are the sum of all of your efforts have to be spit out that speaker, and if you get that wrong, then
the rest of it's just
bummer.
Yeah, bummer.
Cool to talk about, but your speaker is going to give you that final delivery, and obviously we work for Celestion, and we would say how important that is. But think about it. I mean, there's no other truth. I mean, that's what's going to deliver all every lick you've learned, the rig you put together, the pedals you've chosen, everything you've done, the sum of all that in an audible fashion is going to be through your speaker. So
if the video was useful for you, hey, give us a like down below. And if you want to hear more from Celestion, please click the subscribe button.